Have you ever grown up in a house where silence felt alive, where even the walls seemed to know something you didn't? I used to think my childhood home was just old, the kind of place where the floorboards creaked and the wind found its way through every crack. But sometimes, in that silence, I could swear the house was listening. There were rooms that carried whispers, corners that held their breath when you walked by, and one door that was never meant to open. My sister's room. I was told she was sick, that she needed to stay isolated. My parents said it so calmly, with the kind of tone adults use when they want you to stop asking questions. She just needs rest, sweetheart. Don't disturb her. So I didn't. For years, I walked past that door pretending it wasn't there. But you can't ignore something that calls to you, not really. The keyhole was small, but even as a child, I could feel the cold air seeping from the other side, like the room was exhaling secrets into the hallway. It's strange how a locked door can shape your entire childhood. I grew up learning to avoid curiosity, to pretend silence was normal, to live in a house where certain things were never discussed. The television was always low. My parents' conversations always stopped when I entered the room. And whenever I asked about my sister, how old she was, what she liked, why I never saw her, the answer was always the same rehearsed line. She's not ready to see anyone yet. You ever felt like your family was hiding something from you? Something that made every explanation sound like a story meant for children? I did. And the older I got, the more that feeling grew into a quiet, constant unease. It wasn't fear exactly, it was awareness. Awareness that the people who raised me weren't afraid of what was outside our home, but of what was inside it. I used to sit in the hallway at night, when everyone was asleep, and stare at that door. The wood was darker than the others, almost like it had absorbed the years of secrets pressed against it. Sometimes I thought I heard something, movement, breathing, maybe even a faint hum, but when I leaned closer, the house would go still again. Completely still. I'd crawl back to my room, telling myself it was just the wind. But deep down, I knew the wind didn't sound like that. It's strange the things we choose to believe when we're young. How easily comfort can become a kind of blindness. I told myself my sister's illness explained everything. The closed door, the whispers, the tension in my parents' eyes. But illness doesn't usually make the lights flicker behind a locked door. It doesn't make shadows move when you're alone in the hallway. And it doesn't make your mother cry in the kitchen after midnight when she thinks you're asleep. Years later, I would still remember that sound, the low hum of the refrigerator, the tap dripping into the sink, and her quiet sobs breaking through the noise. My father never comforted her. He would just stand beside her, silent, his hand resting on her shoulder like a warning instead of support. And every time I saw that look in his eyes, that mixture of fatigue and fear, I realized it wasn't my sister they were protecting. It was something else. Something much darker. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear might make you rethink every family rule you ever grew up with. Sometimes, the things we're told not to touch are the very things that define who we are. And sometimes, the people we trust most are the ones building the walls around the truth. I used to believe that fear lived outside the house, in the forest, in the dark, in everything unknown. But as I got older, I learned something else. The real fear was already home. It had been there the whole time, sitting quietly behind a locked door. And that's where it all began, the night I realized that the silence in our house wasn't emptiness at all. It was waiting. I grew up believing that silence meant safety. That if I didn't ask questions, if I followed the rules, the house would stay calm. It's strange how fear becomes routine, how you start to measure your days not by what happens, but by what doesn't. The door at the end of the hallway remained closed, year after year, as seasons changed and I grew older. The locks gathered dust, the air around it thickened with age, and still, no one spoke her name. There were moments when I thought I imagined her, this sister I supposedly had but never saw. When you live with something forbidden long enough, it begins to feel like a dream you had too many times. I tried once to draw her face, but I realized I didn't know what she looked like. I only knew the sound of her absence. My mother used to hum when she cooked, but the song would stop the second she passed that door. My father never walked down that hallway after dark. I'd ask sometimes, just to see their reactions. Is she getting better? She's resting. Can I see her someday? Maybe when she's ready. But ready never came. And eventually, I stopped asking. There's a peculiar kind of loneliness that comes from growing up around secrets. It shapes the way you breathe. You learn to watch instead of speak, to feel emotions you're not allowed to name. The house taught me that early. I'd spend hours tracing my fingers along the wallpaper, following the faint seams where the paper peeled away from the wood. I wanted to know what was underneath, what was hidden beneath the surface. But every time curiosity rose, I'd hear my father's voice from another room, "Don't wander too far." When you're a child, you think your parents' words are absolute truth. But as you grow older, their voices start to sound less like protection and more like warning. I was 16 the night I realized how fragile their version of the truth really was. A thunderstorm rolled over the hills, the kind that shakes the windows and makes the air hum. My parents were out, they had gone to see someone, though I can't remember who. The rain came down hard, hammering the roof until it drowned every sound. I was reading by candlelight when the power went out completely. The sudden darkness felt alive, breathing with me. I tried to tell myself it was fine. I'd been through storms before. But then I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind. A low, irregular sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside the house. I froze, listening. There it was again, a muffled, rhythmic sobbing, the kind that comes from someone trying not to be heard. It wasn't the pipes, and it wasn't the storm. It was human. It was coming from the hallway. I took the candle and started walking. Every step seemed louder than it should have been. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move at the edge of the light. But when I turned, there was nothing there. Just the shadows stretching down the corridor like long fingers. The closer I got, the clearer the sound became. It wasn't just crying, it was whispering too. Someone was speaking between the sobs, words I couldn't understand. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob of my sister's room. Cold. Metal cold. The sound stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse than the crying. I pulled my hand back and ran. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept hearing it replay in my mind, the sobbing, the whisper, the sudden silence. The next morning, I told myself it was just my imagination. The storm, the darkness, the isolation. It all made sense. At least, that's what I told myself. But the feeling didn't go away. A few days later, I was in my parents' room, looking for candles when I found something I'd never seen before. In the back of their wardrobe, hidden under folded blankets, was a small rusted key. I don't know how I knew, but the second I saw it, I understood what it was. The metal was cool against my palm, and for the first time in my life, I felt like the house was holding its breath. I told myself I just wanted to see. That I wasn't going to open the door, just look. Just make sure the sound was real. But when I walked down the hallway again, the floor creaked the same way it had that night. My pulse echoed in my ears, and the candle flame in my hand shook with every breath I took. The key slid into the lock with a sound I can still hear in my nightmares, a dry click that seemed to cut through the air like a blade. For a moment, I froze. My instincts screamed at me to stop, to leave it alone. But I turned the key anyway. The door opened an inch. A smell hit me immediately, damp, mold, and something metallic underneath. I pushed the door slowly, and the light from my candle spilled into the room. Dust floated in the air like fog, and for a second, I thought the room was empty. Then I saw movement in the corner. A figure. Thin. Barely human. She was sitting on the floor, her knees drawn to her chest, her hair tangled and hanging over her face. The light made her flinch. Chains rattled faintly as she moved, and when she looked up, I saw her eyes, wide, hollow, and wet with tears. I didn't recognize her, but she whispered my name. Anna. The sound of it nearly made me drop the candle. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. My body wanted to run, but my heart wouldn't let me. Her voice was weak, like it hadn't been used in years. She tried to stand, but the chains around her wrists pulled her back down. I knew you'd come, she said. I took a step closer, every part of me trembling. Who are you? She smiled faintly, her lips cracked and pale. Your sister. The candle flickered, and I swear for a moment, the entire room seemed to breathe. The walls, the floor, even the air, they were all alive, pulsing with something I couldn't understand. My throat tightened. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But she was there. I knelt beside her, unsure if I should touch her. Her skin was cold, her wrists raw and bleeding where the metal cut in. The chain wasn't new, It had been there for years. The floor beneath her was marked with grooves, as if she'd spent countless nights trying to pull herself free. "Why are you here?" I whispered. Her eyes darted toward the door, fear flashing through them. "They said I was sick. They said I needed to stay here so no one would get hurt." Her voice cracked. "But they lied." Before I could say anything, a sudden creak echoed from the hallway. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. I turned off the candle, my heart pounding. The door remained open just a few inches, enough for me to see a shadow stretch across the floor. It paused outside, then moved away. When I lit the candle again, my sister was staring at me. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "They'll find out." That night, I didn't sleep again. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. I thought about the chains, the smell, the way she said my name like it was both a prayer and a curse. My parents didn't mention anything unusual the next morning. They moved through breakfast like ghosts, calm and deliberate. But I noticed things I hadn't before: the tremor in my mother's hands, the way my father kept his gaze low when I asked simple questions. Something inside me shifted. I began to search the house. Quietly. Carefully. In drawers, in closets, behind old boxes. I found pills that didn't have labels, photographs with faces scratched out, letters signed but never sent. Every discovery felt like another piece of the truth pressing down on me. I started to realize that this wasn't just a family secret. It was a ritual. A pattern that had existed long before I was old enough to understand it. Over the next few days, I visited the room in secret. My sister was always there, always awake. She told me pieces of her story, fragmented and hard to believe. She said she had been locked there since the night our grandmother died. That she'd heard them fighting about money, inheritance, something about bloodlines and keeping the family name clean. She said she tried to tell someone once, but after that night, she never saw the outside again. At first, I didn't believe her. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I couldn't. I needed to see proof. She told me to look in the study. "The drawer under the desk," she whispered. "They keep everything there." That night, when my parents were asleep, I went to the study. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of old paper. I opened the drawer she mentioned and found a small box filled with documents, bank statements, letters, and an old newspaper clipping. The headline was dated 20 years ago. "Local woman found dead in family estate. No charges filed." The article mentioned our grandmother. It said she'd fallen down the stairs during an argument with her daughter. My mother. I don't know how long I stared at that page, my hands shaking. There was a photo too, our family standing outside the house. My mother's smile looked forced, my father's expression blank. And in the background, a small figure stood near the window. My sister. Something in me broke that night. The pieces of my childhood I'd held together with blind faith started to crumble. The rules, the silence, the constant fear, it all made sense now. The next evening, I went back to the room. My sister was sitting in the dark, humming softly to herself. I knelt beside her and showed her the newspaper clipping. She looked at it for a long time before whispering, "She didn't fall." "What do you mean?" "She pushed her." I stared at her, unsure if she meant our mother or someone else. Her voice trembled as she went on. "They said I was sick because I saw it happen. Because I told the truth. They said I made it up. But I didn't." The air in the room felt heavier with every word. My candle burned lower, shadows growing taller on the walls. "Anna," she said quietly, "they'll never let me leave. Not alive." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was safe now, that I'd help her, but before I could speak, a noise erupted from behind me. The door slammed shut. The candle went out. And in that moment of total darkness, I felt something cold brush against my shoulder. Her voice, barely above a whisper, said, "They're coming." The sound of the door slamming echoed through the room like a shot. For a moment, I thought the walls themselves had moved. The candle died in an instant, plunging everything into darkness so complete I could taste it, thick, metallic, suffocating. My breath came in shallow bursts as I fumbled for the matchbox in my pocket, but my hands were shaking too hard to strike a flame. In the dark, every sound was amplified: the soft rattle of the chain around her wrist, the distant moan of the wind against the window, and the uneven rhythm of our breathing. I whispered her name, but she didn't answer. Instead, I felt her hand on my arm, cold, trembling, real. "Don't move," she whispered. "They'll know you're here." "Who?" My voice was barely audible, caught between disbelief and dread. "Them." I wanted to ask more, but then came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last. My body froze. It was a sound I'd known my entire life, one that once meant safety. My father. The doorknob turned. Once. Twice. But the lock held. He exhaled sharply, muttered something under his breath, and the footsteps moved away. My heart hammered so hard I thought he could hear it through the wall. I waited until the sound disappeared completely before lighting another match. The flame flickered, trembling as if afraid to be here too. When the light returned, she was staring at me, eyes wide, hollow, almost pleading. "You shouldn't have come back," she said softly. "Now you're part of it." "Part of what?" Her lips parted, but before she could answer, a faint scraping sound came from the wall behind her. It wasn't rats, it was too steady, too deliberate. It was like metal brushing against wood. My stomach twisted. "What is that?" She didn't look up. "Sometimes, they watch from the other side." That sentence stayed with me long after I left the room. I waited until dawn before sneaking back to my room. Every shadow felt alive. Every creak in the floor made me flinch. When the sun finally rose, I went downstairs, trying to act normal. My parents were already at the table. My mother smiled when she saw me, that polite, practiced smile that never touched her eyes. "Rough night?" she asked. I nodded. The storm kept me up. She poured coffee. "Yes," she said quietly. "The house always feels restless when it rains." My father didn't look at me. He just stirred his cup slowly, the spoon clinking against the porcelain in perfect rhythm. There was a faint cut on his hand, a thin line across his knuckle, like he'd scraped it against something sharp. He noticed me staring and pulled his sleeve down. No one mentioned the noise from last night. No one asked why the key to my sister's room was missing. That morning, I couldn't stop thinking about what she said. "Now you're part of it." The words repeated in my head like a curse. I told myself I needed proof, something solid, something that made sense. Maybe my sister was delusional. Maybe she'd been sick all these years, and my parents really were protecting her, and me, from something dangerous. But the more I tried to believe that, the less it fit. The next evening, I waited until they went to bed. Then I went back to her room. She was sitting in the same spot, staring at the window even though it was boarded shut. I brought her food, nothing much, just bread and water. She took it with both hands, like she hadn't eaten in days. "Why are you still here?" I asked. "Why didn't you ever try to run?" She smiled faintly, but there was no joy in it. "You think I didn't try?" I looked at the chain, heavy and rusted. "You could have screamed. Someone would have heard you." Her eyes met mine. And what would they have said? That I'm crazy? That I imagine things? That's what they told everyone last time. Last time. She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to the corner of the room, where the wallpaper peeled slightly from the wall. "Behind there," she said, "they buried what they didn't want you to find." I hesitated but crossed the room anyway. I peeled the wallpaper back with trembling hands. Beneath it, etched directly into the plaster, were dozens of names, carved roughly, as if by a knife. Some I recognized, old family members, neighbors who'd moved away, even a teacher from my childhood. But one name made my blood run cold. Mine. I stumbled backward, breath shallow. Why is my name here?" She looked at me with pity. "Because he plans everything in advance." I didn't want to hear more. I left the room shaking, the sound of the chain echoing behind me like a heartbeat. Over the next few days, I couldn't look at my father without wondering. His quietness, his calm, it all felt too controlled. The way he'd disappear for hours, sometimes whole nights, always returning with dirt on his boots. My mother avoided his eyes, and I realized that whatever lived between them wasn't love. It was fear disguised as loyalty. One night, I followed him. He left the house after midnight, carrying a small lantern. The rain had started again, gentle at first, then harder as he disappeared into the trees behind our property. I stayed far enough not to be seen but close enough to hear the faint crunch of gravel under his boots. The forest felt different that night, heavier, like it was listening. He stopped at a clearing I didn't know existed. In the center stood an old wooden structure, half collapsed, covered in vines. He knelt there, placed the lantern on the ground, and began to dig. I watched from the trees as he unearthed something wrapped in cloth. It took me a moment to realize it was small, too small for anything good. He unwrapped it carefully. My stomach turned. It was a doll. A child's doll. Its face cracked, one glass eye missing, and around its neck was a thin silver chain, the same kind my sister wore. He buried it again, slowly, almost reverently, then stood there in silence for a long time before whispering something I couldn't hear. The wind carried his words away, but his posture said everything. It wasn't guilt. It was devotion. When I returned home, soaked and shaking, my mother was waiting at the kitchen table. She looked like she hadn't moved in hours. When she saw me, she didn't ask where I'd been. She just said, "He knows you went upstairs." My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" Her eyes glistened with tears she wouldn't let fall. "The room. Your sister. You shouldn't have opened it." I wanted to scream at her, demand answers, but the look on her face stopped me. She wasn't angry. She was terrified. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time. I could hear them arguing downstairs, voices low but sharp. My name came up again and again. Around midnight, the house went silent. Then, a soft knock on my door. "Anna," my mother whispered. "Let me in." Her voice was shaking. I hesitated, then opened it slightly. She slipped inside, clutching a bundle of papers. "You have to leave," she said. "What are you talking about?" "He's planning something. He said it has to be done before the next full moon."
I stared at her.
"What has to be done?" Her answer came in a whisper that didn't sound like hers. "He thinks the sickness never left the bloodline. That one of you has to carry it." She handed me the papers, old medical records, handwritten notes, photographs. One picture showed my father as a young man standing beside another girl, not my sister, someone else entirely. The caption on the back read, "First attempt, failed." My mother's voice broke. "He believes your sister was chosen first. That locking her away was mercy. But he's lost control now. He says the blood called him again." I stepped back, my heart racing. "That's insane." She grabbed my hand. "Promise me you'll leave tomorrow. Don't come back. Don't go near the woods." Before I could answer, the sound of footsteps came from the hall. My mother's face went pale. She shoved the papers back into my hand and whispered, "Hide them." Then she slipped out, closing the door behind her just as my father's shadow crossed the threshold. He stood there for a long time, silent. I pretended to be asleep. Eventually, the shadow moved away. I didn't sleep after that. At dawn, I went back to my sister's room one last time. She was awake, staring at the door. When she saw me, she smiled faintly. "You know now," she said. I nodded. "I'm getting you out." She shook her head slowly. "You can't. He'll find us. He always does." But I was already unlocking the chain. It clinked against the floor, louder than I wanted. She winced as I helped her stand. Her legs were weak, trembling under her weight, but she managed a step. Then another. We made it halfway down the hallway when the floor creaked behind us. "Going somewhere?" His voice. Calm. Controlled. My father stood at the end of the corridor, a shadow against the dim morning light. My mother was behind him, her face pale, her hands clenched together. "No one's leaving," he said softly. "Not until it's finished." I stepped in front of my sister, my hands shaking. "You're sick," I said. "Whatever this is, it ends now." He smiled, a small, sorrowful smile that chilled me more than anger ever could. "You think this started with me," he said. "You think you're the first one to open that door?" My sister's voice broke. "Don't listen to him." But I couldn't look away. There was something in his eyes, not madness exactly, but conviction. The kind that makes people do unspeakable things and call them sacred. He took a step closer. "You have her eyes," he said quietly. That's how I knew it was you. My sister grabbed my arm. Run. We ran. The next few minutes were a blur, the sound of footsteps, shouts, doors slamming. The rain had started again, pounding against the windows like fists. I pulled her through the kitchen, toward the back door, but it wouldn't open. The key was gone. My mother appeared behind us, trembling. For a moment, I thought she was going to stop us. But instead, she pressed something into my hand, the missing key. Go, she whispered. We burst outside into the rain, the cold biting into our skin. The forest loomed ahead, dark and endless. We didn't look back until we reached the edge of the trees. That's when we heard it, the faint creak of the back door opening, and my father's voice calling our names, calm as ever. Anna, come home. We ran deeper into the woods. The mud clung to our feet, the branches tearing at our clothes. My sister stumbled more than once, and I half carried her until we reached a small clearing, the same one I'd seen him in before. The old wooden structure still stood there, leaning under its own weight. We can hide here, I said, but she was staring at the ground. The soil was freshly turned. I followed her gaze and saw it, the edge of the cloth he'd buried days earlier. I pulled it free, expecting the doll. But it wasn't the doll this time. It was something else. A photograph. It was old, water-damaged, but still clear enough to see. My father younger, standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. In front of them, 2 children. Me and my sister. Only the date didn't make sense. It was from before I was born. My sister looked at me, her expression unreadable. Now you understand, she said softly. We were never supposed to exist at the same time. The wind howled through the clearing, carrying her words into the dark. I wanted to ask what she meant, but then the sound of footsteps came from the trees behind us. Closer this time. Steady. Relentless. He's here, she whispered. The forest seemed to close in, every branch, every shadow pressing closer. I grabbed her hand and pulled her deeper into the trees, not caring where we went. All I knew was that we couldn't stop. Not here. Not now. And yet, somewhere between the trees, I began to hear it, that same faint whisper I'd heard through the locked door all those years ago. Only this time, it wasn't her voice. It was mine. It echoed through the forest, soft but clear, repeating a single phrase. Don't open the door. I stumbled to a stop, my breath ragged, the world spinning around me. My sister squeezed my hand. Her eyes were different now, calmer, almost sad. I tried to warn you, she said. The forest fell silent. And in that silence, I realized that maybe she hadn't been the prisoner after all. Maybe I was. Under the storm's thinning roar, the house seemed to inhale, one last greedy breath that tasted like wet ash and old rules. I stood at the lip of the open trapdoor with smoke lifting in slow ribbons, watching the cellar pulse orange, listening to wood pop the way knuckles pop before a fight. My sister leaned against me, light as a coat you can't take off, and whispered that strange steady whisper she used when everything hurt. It won't let us go, Anna. Not yet. She said the house as if it were a person we had disappointed. The word inheritance drifted through my head, not money, not land, but a posture, the way a family teaches you to bow to a door. I helped her down the stairs because the floor upstairs had begun to glow at the seams. The cellar air was drier than the storm outside, drier than the smoke itself, as if all the moisture had been trained years ago to rise and leave this room to its function. The chair waited where it always had, small, almost apologetic, a lie of a chair that promised rest and meant obedience. I set my sister on a crate and pressed my palm to her side. The bleeding had slowed to a warm, heavy ooze. She gave me that tilted smile, like she understood something I didn't and wasn't sure I should. Above us a hinge screamed. My father's boots entered the study the way a sermon enters a chapel, already decided. He didn't call my name. He didn't ask if we were all right. He spoke to the ledger that was no longer there. The last page can still be corrected. The cellar answered with a fall of soot. You can stop, I said, loud enough to find the edges of the room. Endings don't need your signature. He lowered himself through the hatch with the careful grace of a man who believes the floor loves him. Behind his shoulder, a sliver of my mother's face appeared, paler than steam, hammer in hand, eyes unfocused, a listener more than a watcher. You told me you'd leave it alone, she said without moving her mouth. I told you I'd finish, he answered, and perhaps to him those had always been the same promise. My sister's fingers found mine and arranged them like a prayer I didn't remember learning. Look at him, she said, not angry, not pleading, more like a nurse cataloguing symptoms. He's not stopping because he's cruel. He's stopping because he cannot imagine breathing without this. That's what they never teach you about coercive control. It works both ways. He heard the word control and flinched. It was the first honest movement I'd seen in him since we opened the door. I didn't make the rules, he said softly. I kept them. By then the house had begun its own procedures. Heat found the joists first, then the staircase, then the belly of the walls where old nails held things together out of habit. The study floor whitened at the edges like paper near a candle. My mother's shoes scraped back, the hammer rang once and went quiet. I pictured her slumping to the hall rug and pressing her palms to the pattern, memory under skin. The nights she had sat through whispers, the mornings she had poured coffee for a man who believed ritual could rearrange consequence. Generational trauma is a phrase you read in library books. In a house like this, it is simply the way the ceiling settles. He stepped toward us, knife low again, his wrist bandaged in blackened cloth, and for a heartbeat I saw him as a young father in a clean shirt, steady and practical, the sort of man neighbors describe as reliable. The most dangerous devotions wear ordinary shoes. I never meant to harm you, he offered, and the words were true in the way a dream is true, accurate to the dreamer, murderous to everyone else. Then stop, I said. Let the fire do what justice never could. He shook his head, the patience of a teacher returning to his diagram. Fire cleans what's impure, but it cannot choose. Someone must choose. My sister laughed very quietly. You don't hear yourself, do you? You always needed somebody to sit, so your choosing could sound like duty. She slid off the crate and stood, listing slightly, hands at her sides, nothing like surrender. You chained the listener and called her the problem. When she screamed, he replied, you couldn't hear anything else. The ceiling above the trapdoor blackened and blistered. Smoke poured down like a crowd entering a theater late. The cellar walls, stone and earth, held their line, old and different, a locked room with its own doctrine. I took a step to block him from the chair and he smiled his small paternal smile, the one that had once meant good job and now meant good. You have learned to stand exactly where I needed you. It didn't become a struggle. It became arithmetic. He redirected my reach, and there I was, off balance, remembering every lesson he'd taught me about leverage while he pretended to teach me safety. The knife slipped past my sleeve and kissed my shoulder, superficial, but pain wakes you in useful ways. I fell sideways into the beam and thought, absurdly, of Thanksgiving gravy and the way my mother skimmed fat with a spoon until it stopped shining. Clarity can be cruel and beautiful at once. Anna, my sister said, and I turned. She wasn't moving toward me. She was moving toward the chair. No, I said, too quick, because the word is shaped like panic in my mouth. It only ends if the listener stops lending her ears, she answered. Someone has to show the house what silence looks like. That's his language, I said. His theology. It was ours, she corrected. Until now. She sat without wincing. It wasn't compliance. It was authorship. She pulled one strap across her wrist and tightened it, then the other, clumsy but certain. I grabbed the leather and fought it. She let me for the length of one shared childhood and then tugged it snug anyway. Her eyes found mine and did something I couldn't bear, forgave me for all the years I walked past a door and called it love. You'll burn, I whispered, idiotic in a room that had already chosen fire. I already did, she said. My father licked his thumb and smudged soot on the knife as if giving it a blessing. The motion was so mundane it made me nauseous. He raised it, not to her throat, not to her heart, but to the strap's buckle, because he needed the ritual pure. The ledger didn't record murders. It recorded completions. I caught his wrist. He didn't fight hard. He let me feel the illusion of agency because that too was part of the script. The daughter believes she interferes, the father corrects the scene, the house hums approval. A roar upstairs, support beams surrendering like old men to weather, shook dust into our hair. The trap door shivered. He glanced up and calculated loss, roof, hallway, study. He glanced down and calculated gain, one last faithful line. He pressed the knife to the buckle. My sister closed her eyes and began to hum. It wasn't a hymn. It wasn't the lullaby my mother had sung in the kitchen when she thought I couldn't hear. It was the note you make when a dentist asks you to breathe and you try to impress discipline on pain. The room held it. The house paused. For a second I believed the hum might cancel everything. The noise of gaslighting, the arithmetic of captivity, the way an unreliable memory learns to obey whichever voice speaks last. But the ledger in his head had more pages than my hope. The knife clicked metal. The strap gave. "Good girl," he murmured. Something in me broke with a clean sound, like a glass you were told not to use because it was for company. I took the knife from him the way you take a toy from a child who has decided the game must end. No violence, only finality. He looked surprised, but not angry. A father disarmed by his daughter, genre, education. I threw the blade into the darkest corner I could find. He watched its arc, marked the spot, and I understood how many nights he had practiced this choreography alone. A wave of heat shouldered down hard. The trapdoor's boards began to glow at the grain. The chair's shadow leapt up the wall. The outline of straps turned circus tall. My mother's voice arrived as a cough. "Come out," she called softly, as if she had a say, as if the house would consult her schedule. He answered first. "Not yet." "Now," she said, the smallest rebellion she'd let herself shape in 20 years. He ignored her and laid his palm on my sister's head, not a blessing, not quite a possession, just that old map, the one that turns every woman into coordinates. "It's almost over," he promised, and I realized the earliest lie he ever told was always framed as comfort. I moved behind him and pushed, hard enough to cut through ritual, not hard enough to feel like fury. He stumbled, purely human for a moment, knees on stone, palms scraping grit. Smoke wrapped us like a shawl woven by hands that used to hold kinder things. I unbuckled my sister's straps, not gentle, not cruel, urgent. The leather stuck to her skin with sweat and a faint adhesive of years. She gasped and then laughed, sharp and bright. "Run," I asked. "Where?" she said, and even through the heat we smiled because the word "where" had been our private joke in a house that always answered back to the room. He found the corner and fetched the knife with the blind certainty of a liturgy. The trapdoor blew inward, a plank split and fell, trailing sparks like a comet that forgot what direction meant. Fresh air plunged down and made the fire angrier, as relief often does. I pulled my sister up the steps 2 at a time until the gap forced both of us flat. My mother's hands reached through, grasped my wrists, pulled. I rose into a study painted in soot and shimmering with small, impatient flames. "Your father," she began, but the sentence ended like a thread chewed by a spool's hunger. He climbed behind us with surprising ease, knife low and correct, mouth set to the quiet shape of endings. Smoke lifted around him like acolytes. For a second I thought, if he were any other man and this any other story, a push would send him down and finish the math. But he wasn't any other man. He was all the ones who believe the world hinges on their willingness to finish what they call duties. "You can't shove that to death. You have to starve it." "Leave," I told my mother. She stared, unsure which of us she was failing by obeying. Old training dragged her toward the hallway. "Take the road," I added. "Do not look back." Maybe she listened. Maybe she didn't. When Smoke writes, it blurs everything that tries to read. He advanced 1 measured step. The knife described a small, polite arc. "No more doors," my sister said, and stepped into him. He expected retreat. He got the opposite. Her hand covered his knife hand. Her other hand took his shoulder. Her body found his balance and took it away. They fell together. She turned her hips with the ease of a person who has rehearsed fear into muscle memory. The blade slid under his ribs. Not deep, but enough to replace certainty with pain. His eyes widened, not at injury, at disobedience. He had never accounted for her as an actor. In his story, she was always an instrument. He coughed once. Blood pooled in the sternum's hollow. He looked small finally, and I despised the pity that tried to rise. Smoke chewed the ceiling. The hallway shrugged off the portrait of my grandmother. Glass shattered into a new constellation. He reached for the chair that wasn't there and found only floor. "Finish," he said, perhaps to me, perhaps to the fire. I didn't oblige. Sometimes refusing to play is the only strike that matters. We tried the front door and it refused because heat has a hand for holding. We tried the kitchen and the windows answered with a collapsing sigh. The house had decided on its solution: take everything. I pulled my sister through the narrowest corridor of flame toward the back hall, where the linoleum puckered like skin. Her breath grew high and tight, a kettle refusing to boil. The ledger didn't need ink anymore. the house would keep the record in color and heat. We reached the last intact doorway, the one to the foyer that used to greet guests with the smell of lemon oil, and the floor there gave a warning groan. The beam below it had chawed through. If we stepped wrong, we would go down into the basement and into the chair's orbit again. That was the final geometry. Either we burned together on the ground floor, or we fell together into the room that believed it owned us. "I'm so tired of choices that aren't," she said. "Stand with me," I said. We stood. He staggered after us, one hand over the wound, the other still clutching the knife as if it might argue the house into mercy. Fire met him in a rush, an embrace that wasn't negotiable. He didn't scream. He made a quiet sound like a man surprised to be alone. The knife clattered free. He folded onto his knees and then his side, and in that instant I saw the man who had carried me to bed when I pretended sleep on the couch, the man who knew how to repair a hinge, the man whose shadow had taught the hallway to be long. Love is an unreliable narrator. It tried to speak. The smoke took its sentence and made it short. Heat pressed us to the wall. Plaster bubbled and flaked. My sister's legs trembled as if some part of her wanted to run just to honor the animal that kept her alive this long. The front door split. A tongue of night appeared beyond it, so close, so thin. "On 3, I said, because counting gives people something to hold when holding is impossible. 1. She squeezed my hand, small and cool. 2. We didn't say 3. We moved. The floor accepted my weight and considered hers and then decided against us. The beam beneath the foyer sighed, and the world tilted, and we fell into the house's mouth. We landed hard enough to jaw the breath out of time. The cellar greeted us with noise like applause, fire eating stored paint, flame nibbling oiled rags, the old chair catching at last and surrendering itself with an eager hiss. Pain exploded in my ankle, then settled into a bright, precise throb, sprained, not broken. My sister didn't move at first. Then she rolled onto her back, hair dark with soot, eyes astonishingly calm. "Listen," she said. I did. For the first time since we opened the door, I heard nothing in the house but fire. No ledger scratching from the past, no command braided into the studs, no ritual asking to be fed. Just burning, bad record made kinder by unmaking. In that quiet I understood the last piece. He hadn't only been part of the cycle, she had too. Not as victim alone. As pivot. He needed a listener who gave the house a throat. She needed a witness who could prove she existed. Neither of them could stop because stopping would erase the story they'd used instead of blood. Rage and Mercy looked at each other and recognized cousins. She turned her head toward me and smiled like a secret. "You hear it?" she asked. "I hear it ending," I said. "Good," she whispered. "Then we can go." The ceiling groaned and mercifully began to drop. The chair collapsed with a hiss like relief. Flame licked the last of the tally marks from the wall and left simple stone. Smoke descended in a soft, unarguable blanket. My chest learned the old infant rhythm, short, shallow, greedy, and then forgot it again. I took her hand with all the gentleness I had left and felt her squeeze back, determined and tender, two things I used to believe could not live together. "I'm not afraid," she said. "I'm not alone," I answered. The floor above us folded like a book closing. The trapdoor frame surrendered and fell across our feet like a quilt. Heat pressed its palm to my cheek. I let my eyes close. If there is a moment when the body chooses, I felt ours do it together, refusal turning into release, listening softening into silence, the story lying down where it began. It didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a house learning how to stop. The last thing I knew was not a voice and not a word. It was the absence of both, finally honest. Then the room became light, and then the light became nothing, and in that nothing an old sentence let go. The forest teaches what the world tries to hide. The world wasn't hiding anything anymore. If you reached the end and this story stayed with you, write behind the door in the comments so I know you were here. If this kind of dark, intimate storytelling matters to you, like the video, it helps these quiet truths find the people who need them. And there's a companion video right beside this one that deepens the theme. Click it and come with me there.